Welcome to Nittany Sports Now's podcast. Joe and the Fatman, Joe Smeltzer, Kyle Fatman, Golik with you as always. And we're going to be joined by a guy who is a legend in the state of Virginia. He is a sports columnist for the Virginian Pilot and Daily Press. He's been covering sports in that state for more than 40 years, which means he was there for Frank Beamer's entire run at Virginia Tech. The guy that Virginia Tech fans are hoping will replicate that run or come close to it is a guy Penn State fans know all too well, James Franklin. David was there for all of Franklin's introductory press conference, and Franklin even referenced a meeting that the two had before he officially took the job, which we'll get into later. But David, thank you for joining us. I'll start by asking, you were in the room for James Franklin's introductory press conference. What were your takeaways, and how did being around Franklin in person in that setting match up with what you knew of him before?
Well, Joe and Kyle, first of all, thanks for having me. And since you guys are up there in Happy Valley, boots on the ground, you are far more aware than I of how James Franklin can work a room.
Yes, he can.
And he did exactly that at his introductory news conference. And then afterward, he met with a handful of us off in a side room, and he was equally impressive there. He's been at this a long time. He knows what he's doing, and you can see how he would have impressed Virginia Tech's search committee. And I think what was striking about the entire day, guys, is as James Franklin emerged as a candidate at Virginia Tech, and a natural one as soon as he was let go, we all wondered, is he using the Hokies as leverage with other schools and maybe holding out for something better? And I think Virginia Tech wondered the same. But as we talked to members of the search committee, and they gave us some anecdotal evidence of quite the contrary, when 5 members of the Virginia Tech committee, including athletic director Whit Babcock, flew down to Reynolds Plantation to meet with Coach Franklin, they didn't just find him sitting in a room waiting for a job interview. In front of him, James Franklin had printouts of Whit Babcock's presentation to the Board of Visitors back in August, proposing more university funding for athletics, and also a copy of the subsequent Board of Visitors proposal and resolution that committed $229.2 million in enhanced university funding for athletics in the next 4 years. Franklin had taken notes. He had questions. He had done his homework. He was clearly interested in the job because Virginia Tech, in his words, has a plan. And I think that's what really sold those folks from Blacksburg. Here's a guy who doesn't want a job. He wants our job.
So, David, you know, when James was in front of all you guys and with all the preparation and going through everything, what was your initial reactions to a lot of his answers? Because we've been accustomed to hearing him for the past 12 years. This was a different voice for you guys.
Sure.
What were your impressions of a lot of his answers? Did you feel that they were calculated? Did you find stuff genuine? Did you find things long-winded? What were your thoughts?
Long-winded is a kind description, Kyle. And he confesses to as much, by the way, and even chided himself on multiple occasions. And sure, was part of it rehearsed? Yes, he's a showman, but it comes naturally to him. And I found him, for the most part, to be quite authentic, never more so, guys, than during his opening statement when he began to speak about Brent Pry, his former defensive coordinator at Penn State and his predecessor at Virginia Tech. And Franklin choked up, and it was so striking. And he talked about how much Pry and the Pry family mean to him because it's a relationship that goes back more than 3 decades. When Franklin was playing at East Stroudsburg, and Brent Pry's dad was the OC, and Brent Pry was a lowly GA on the defensive side. And the families, excuse me, have been close ever since. And to hear him just kind of discuss that relationship was really moving.
So James Franklin took the Virginia Tech job on the Monday. The Thursday before that, he was there for Old Dominion's game, which Ricky Ronnie, former Penn State assistant, he's now the head coach at Old Dominion. You kind of laid this out all on social media, but I wanted to hear it from you on camera about you approaching Coach Franklin to ask about the Virginia Tech job. He politely told you he wasn't commenting. Just how was that experience? And also, do you think there's any legs to some speculation that James Franklin might be taking Ricky Ronnie with him to be his OC at Virginia Tech?
Well, Joe, first of all, I have to credit my friend at WTKR Television in Norfolk, Mark Davis, for being the first to notice that Franklin was down on the sideline. Mark happened to be down at field level and saw him and tweeted about it. And as soon as I saw Mark's tweet, I rushed down from the press box to field level. This is before kickoff. And I very gingerly and cautiously, because I don't know James Franklin, but I approached him, and he could not have been more gracious. Put his hand out, very firm handshake. I explained why I was there, and he looked at my credential and understood that I was just doing my job. But he said he was there to support Coach Ronnie and the Troy coach, who had also been on his staff at Penn State. And after those pleasantries, he made it quite clear that he was not interested in further conversation, which was fine, and I understood that. And we moved on. And then fast forward to his introduction in Blacksburg 6 days later. And when I asked a question and they hand you the mic and they ask you to identify yourself, and he just smiled and he said, "It's good to see you again. And I'm sorry I couldn't say more when we met in Norfolk." Joe, as to the Ricky Ronnie speculation, he was actually asked about it directly at his weekly presser today. And while he did not completely shut the door, he seemed to make it quite clear that he enjoys being a head coach and wants to continue elevating the Old Dominion program, which this season is having a breakout year. 8-3, they've won 4 in a row. Heavy favorites in the regular season finale Saturday, should finish 9-3. And by far the best season of Ricky Ronnie's tenure here.
David, last week, Travis released Virginia Tech's letter of intent for James Franklin. And one of the interesting notes in there was, I believe, $9.5 million for an assistance pool, which would put Virginia Tech back into the top 5 assistants in the country. They used to be there in the early 2000s with Beamer staff when they had Bud, Brian Steinspring, Charlie Wiles, and Odell Haggins. What do you see? Obviously this comes from the board of visitors or viewers. I'm just trying to make sure I have that
visitors,
right.
Yes.
Visitors. How does that align with what Witt's presentation was back in August to now? This is a reality and it's going into action. Where do you see James looking for top assistants to fill that $9.5 million pool?
Well, I think it'll be a combination of things, Colin. I would push back just a little. I don't think Virginia Tech back in the Beamer era was top 5 or 10 in the country in assistant compensation. He was able to retain a lot of that staff because Frank Beamer was such a good boss for whom to work. He created a family atmosphere and fostered, no pun intended, an awful lot of loyalty from that staff. As for how this matches with what Whit Babcock presented to the board, he did not put specific numbers on, say, assistant salary pools or even recruiting budget, support staff, and the like. But when it comes to James putting his staff together, he has already brought, in his number, 8 support staff with him from Penn State. I imagine he will retain some, just a few, 2 or 3 of the current staff in terms of assistant coaches. I wonder if 1 or 2 might accompany him from Penn State, and then others he will get from other places.
So a coach that a lot of Penn State people have been talking about over the past week. To be clear for our viewers, where this was recorded on Monday night, so by the time you see it, things could be completely different in the coaching search as these things go. But as of right now, it feels like Bob Chesney's name has been thrown around for the Penn State job, perhaps as much as anybody. We see the resume. Chesney's obviously won at the D3, D2, FCS, and now FBS levels of James Madison. But from what do you know, what can you tell us about Bob Chesney that goes beyond what he's accomplished in coaching?
Joe, if James Franklin had not been available or had decided not to accept Virginia Tech's offer, I believe Bob Chesney would be the next coach in Blacksburg. He is beyond impressive. And you mentioned the very linear progression of his career. Each step, didn't skip a one, D3, D2, FCS, FBS, a winner at every level. And perhaps more impressive is that at the first 3 stages, at Salve Regina, at Assumption, and Holy Cross, he took over downtrodden programs and flipped them, not eventually, but immediately. He's had 1 losing season in his head coaching career. That was his debut year at Holy Cross when the Crusaders went 5-6. Now, one would argue that he took over a ready-made program at James Madison, which has a long history of football success and where Curt Cignetti knocked it out of the park. But let's also remember that Curt Cignetti took the core of that roster with him to Indiana, where those folks became an instant college football playoff team, and that Chesney, last season in this, is winning with a bunch of guys he brought with him from Holy Cross, which to me makes what he's doing in Harrisonburg all the more impressive. And he has an excellent staff whom he trusts and whom he lets do their jobs. And he's just, to me, very impressive. If I'm a Penn State fan, I think the one question I would have is, okay, he's never worked in any way, shape, or form at the Power 4 level.
Yep.
Fair, right? But I've heard Chesney enough to know that he has spent a lot of time studying and on-site observing NFL franchises and how they do business, how they practice, how they organize. And as college football takes on a more professional-like model with free agency and player compensation, I think that curiosity that Chesney has had about the pro game will serve him well when he inevitably takes over a power conference program, be it Penn State this year, another program this season, or in the future.
David, so I'm going to where I got that top 5 stat was from an episode of Tech Sideline. I think it was either Chris Coleman or Andy Bitter who brought it up. But a segue into that is you were on there. It wasn't one of your Talking with Teel segments. It was after James had his press conference. You guys had a roundtable. I think it was you, Andy, and Dave Cunningham, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
And one of the things you said was, I don't know how this could fail. Okay. Now, at the time, you didn't know the contract numbers when that came out, and we obviously see that it's backloaded. The final 2 years, Virginia Tech's going to be paying James Franklin about, I think, either 11.5 or 12.5 million a year. So
in that range, yeah,
in that range there, and knowing the financial commitment and everything, what is in your mind the definition of success that Franklin has to achieve to keep it's satisfied? Obviously, it's not going to be getting to bowl games in year 1 and year 2 and winning 6-7 games, making that kind of money. But what is the kind of the long-term success plan once Franklin gets acclimated? And do you still feel, now knowing some of this stuff, is there a way you can see this failing with Franklin?
Well, Kyle, there are no sure things in coaching searches. Scott Frost failed at Nebraska. I mean, could there have been a better fit? The guy went 13-0 at UCF. He was going home to Nebraska. How could it not work? But it didn't. And that doesn't mean that Scott Frost is a bad football coach or that Nebraska is a bad job. Just sometimes, for reasons we'll never quite understand, things don't work out. But James Franklin comes with credentials like no other, especially in this cycle. And I would be quite surprised if it doesn't work at Virginia Tech because of the resources that the school is investing in the program. Now, how does that translate to the field? I think there should be expectations of immediate improvement year 1. Whether 6, 7, 8 wins, absolutely should be on the table. We've seen it happen. Kenny Dillingham turned a 3-win Arizona State team into a playoff squad in 1 year and had Texas on the ropes in the Peach Bowl and has won Quinn Ewers' 4th down prayer from advancing through that game. You know,
and a targeting call too.
Yeah, exactly. Great point, Joe. I remember sitting there watching it, screaming at the TV. How can that not be targeting? And so I think it's fair to expect not CFP qualification in year 1, but certainly ACC contention. Sure. This is a conference that we have seen this season and repeatedly in years past, really, that is quite competitive. There's a lot of parity. And I mean, heck, 6 teams are still in the running for the conference championship game, entering the regular season finales. So there's no reason that Virginia Tech can't contend immediately and then eventually win championships and be in the college football playoff.
So one of the things Franklin made a habit of at Penn State, and really, if you even go back to the time when you started writing, this even goes back to the Joe Paterno days, Virginia was a part of the recruiting formula for Penn State. And then in the 90s and 2000s, Beamer was able to break that cycle and even got into Pennsylvania. Do you feel in this, obviously money is money anywhere. We've seen it with Indiana with Kirk Cignetti. Do you feel selling Virginia Tech is as big of an issue today if this would have happened like 20 years ago? Like if this was 2005, would James Franklin have a tougher time selling Virginia Tech than Penn State?
I don't think you'll ever have trouble selling Virginia Tech in state to prospects. Now, whether you can close is a completely different story. And recruiting, guys, is not as regional as it used to be. the internet and such has made it a national game. And the transfer portal has done the same. So this notion that any coach, be it James Franklin or heck, if Nick Saban came out of retirement, locking down his home state, say the way Frank Beamer did in essence back in his prime, or the Miami program did in South Florida back when the Hurricanes were just winning national championships left and right. Those days are gone. Heck, I've been around long enough to have seen Penn State come down here, DJ Dozier, David Macklin, more recently Tyler Warren and Katron Allen. I mean, guys, I've seen them, and so have you. And the Mid-Atlantic is James Franklin's recruiting wheelhouse, dating back to his time, heck, at James Madison as an assistant, and really in his more formative years at Maryland as an assistant. So I think that match is also a very good fit for Virginia Tech.
In a quick follow-up, David, one of the things that I talk to a lot of recruiting folks about is the modern philosophy is your home state, you got to get the key people and then complement it with the talent from around the country to get your class. So Virginia Tech has had a very difficult time keeping talent in the state. What has been the problem with Virginia Tech keeping the top kids in Virginia, quite frankly?
Well, it depends on which era you're talking about, Kyle. One of Justin Fuente's downfalls, and Fuente succeeded Frank Beamer back in 2016. That was Fuente's first season, and it started off great. He inherited a pretty good talent base. He supplemented it with his own guys, and including a junior college transfer quarterback named Gerard Evans. And presto, first year, Fuente's ACC Coach of the Year, Virginia Tech's in the ACC championship game, and extending the eventual national champion Clemson Tigers deep into the fourth quarter of that title game. But then it started to wane in large measure because Fuente did not pay homage to the high school coaches in this state, and it cost the program long term. Now, Brent Pry tried to repair those relationships and largely did a good job, but it's going to take more time. And that has invited others to come in, and others with more resources. So now, Franklin's operating from behind, but with the cash in hand, he should be able to make up ground fairly quickly.
So, David, Penn State fans have gone to know Anthony Poindexter over the past 5 years. You would have been covering Virginia sports when he was an athlete at UVA. What can you tell us about Dex that Penn State fans wouldn't know predating his time on the staff? And is he a guy that you could see being on James Franklin's staff at Virginia Tech, maybe even as the defensive coordinator?
Well, he's been passed over. Franklin passed him over for the defensive coordinator job at Penn State multiple times.
Yep.
Was it 2 or 3 times, right?
Would have been, would have been 3 times because Manny Diaz, Tom Allen, and now Jim Knowles. So, yeah.
So I thought. So I have my doubts about defensive coordinator, but maybe James Franklin thinks he's ready. There are already UVA graduates on the Virginia Tech staff, including Fontel Mines, the wide receivers coach. But Dex was a great college player, was on the Virginia 1995 team that handed Florida State its first ACC loss on that famous Thursday night 30 years ago. And he was very effective as an assistant here. And there are a lot of people who, before Tony Elliott was hired as head coach, wanted to see Dex get the head coaching job. but Carla Williams, the athletic director, chose differently. So yeah, sure, I could see him accompanying Coach Franklin to Blacksburg.
All right, David Teel, thank you very much for joining us, and happy rivalry week.
And happy Thanksgiving to you and
Of course.
all your viewers and listeners, guys.
Yep, you and yours as well.